The smell of lye soap and dampness clung to my skin like a second layer. One I'd worn for so long I barely noticed it anymore. My knees ached against the cold stone floor of the corridor, water from my scrub bucket seeping through the thin fabric of my dress. Around me, the castle buzzed with frantic energy. Servants rushing past with linens, guards barking orders, the head housekeeper's shrill voice echoing from somewhere in the east wing. Tonight was the lunar gathering, the night when the Alpha King would open his halls to the neighboring packs, and everything had to be perfect, everything except me. I kept my head down, my pale blonde hair tied back so tightly it pulled at my scalp, and scrubbed the same section of floor I'd already cleaned twice. It was safer that way. Invisible. The other servants had learned long ago not to speak to me unless necessary. I was the girl who'd arrived 6 months ago in chains, sold to settle my former pack's debt. No name that mattered, no history worth telling, just another body to fill the ranks of the castle's endless workforce. But I remembered who I'd been before my parents died in the border skirmish, before my uncle took over as temporary Alpha, and decided I was more valuable as currency than as kin. I remembered my mother's voice, soft and steady, telling me that strength wasn't always loud, that sometimes the ones who survived were the ones who knew when to bend. I'd bent so far I'd nearly broken. Move. A sharp boot nudged my bucket, sloshing water across the stones. I looked up to see Margot, one of the senior maids, glaring down at me with her usual contempt. The king's guests will be arriving within the hour. This hallway needs to be spotless, and you're in the way. I'm almost finished, I said quietly, wringing out my rag. You're always almost finished, she sneered. Maybe if you worked as hard as you cowered, you'd actually be useful. I bit the inside of my cheek and said nothing. Margot thrived on confrontation, and I'd learned that silence was the only response that didn't earn me extra duties or a cuff to the ear. She snorted in disgust and swept past me, her skirts deliberately kicking over my bucket as she went. Water spread across the floor in a cold, accusing puddle. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, the way my mother had taught me. Then I stood, retrieved the bucket, and started over. By the time the corridor was dry and gleaming, the sun had set. Through the tall arched windows, I could see the first carriages arriving, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the darkness. Music drifted from the great hall, strings and drums, laughter and the clink of glasses. I wasn't permitted anywhere near the festivities, of course. My role tonight was to remain in the servants' quarters, ready to be summoned if needed, but otherwise out of sight. I made my way down the narrow back staircase, my footsteps barely audible on the worn stone. The servants' wing was a different world from the opulent halls above. Low ceilings, dim lighting, the smell of sweat and old bread. A few of the younger maids sat clustered around a table, mending linens and whispering excitedly about the guests. They say the Alpha King hasn't chosen a queen yet, one of them murmured, her eyes wide. Can you imagine? All that power, and he's still alone. I heard he's waiting for his true mate, another added. But some say he'll never find her, that he's too cold, too damaged. Cold? The first girl laughed nervously. He's terrifying. Did you see him when he passed through the kitchens last week? I swear his eyes looked right through me. I slipped past them unnoticed and sank onto my narrow cot in the corner. My hands were raw and red from the day's work, my back stiff from hours of bending and kneeling. I should have felt relieved to be away from the chaos upstairs. But instead, a strange restlessness stirred in my chest. I'd never seen the Alpha King up close. None of us lowly servants had. He was a figure of legend more than flesh, a wolf who'd claimed his throne through blood and strategy, who ruled the northern territories with an iron will. Some said he was cursed, others said he was simply ruthless. But everyone agreed on one thing: he was not a man to be crossed. And yet, as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the distant music and laughter, I found myself wondering what it would be like to be seen by someone like that. Truly seen. Not as a servant or a debt or a ghost, but as a person. The thought was dangerous, so I pushed it away. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by footsteps in the hall and the occasional shout from the upper floors. When the bells chimed midnight, I gave up and rose, slipping on my worn shoes and wrapping a thin shawl around my shoulders. Maybe a walk through the empty kitchens would calm my mind. The castle at night was a labyrinth of shadows and silence. I moved through it like a specter, my steps practiced and sure. I'd just reached the kitchen door when a sound stopped me cold, a low, guttural growl, followed by the crash of breaking glass. My heart hammered in my chest. The sound had come from the direction of the great hall. Common sense told me to turn back, to return to my cot and pretend I'd heard nothing, but something else, some reckless, foolish impulse, pulled me forward. I crept down the corridor, keeping to the shadows, until I reached the massive oak doors that led to the hall. They were slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see the remnants of the gathering, overturned chairs, scattered goblets, a few remaining guests huddled near the far wall. And in the center of it all, a figure stood alone. He was taller than any man I'd ever seen, his broad shoulders draped in a cloak of midnight blue. Dark hair fell to his collar, and even from a distance, I could feel the weight of his presence. An authority so absolute it seemed to bend the air around him, the Alpha King. He turned slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his face, sharp features, a strong jaw, eyes that gleamed like molten gold in the firelight. There was something feral about him, something barely contained, as if the man and the wolf were locked in a constant battle for dominance. And then, as if sensing my gaze, his head snapped toward the door, toward me. Panic flooded my veins. I stumbled backward, my shawl catching on the door handle. For one horrible moment, our eyes met, his burning gold, mine wide with terror, and the world seemed to stop. His expression shifted. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by something I couldn't name, something raw and hungry and utterly consuming. He took a step toward the door. I turned and ran. My footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as I fled, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the servants' quarters, diving onto my cot and pulling the thin blanket over my trembling body. What had I done? What had I been thinking? Spying on the Alpha King like some foolish child. But even as I berated myself, I couldn't shake the memory of that moment. The way he'd looked at me. The way the air between us had seemed to crackle with something electric and inexplicable. I told myself it meant nothing, that I'd imagined the intensity in his gaze. That by morning, he would have forgotten the pale-haired servant girl who dared to watch him from the shadows. I told myself a lot of things that night. None of them were true. When dawn broke, I was summoned. Margot appeared at my cot, her face pinched with irritation. Get up. The head housekeeper wants you in her office. Now. My stomach dropped. Why? How should I know? She snapped. Maybe she's finally realized you're useless and is sending you back where you came from. I dressed quickly, my hands shaking as I fastened the buttons of my cleanest dress. The head housekeeper, Mistress Cora, was a stern woman who ran the household with military precision. Being called to her office was never a good sign. I found her seated behind a heavy oak desk, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "Close the door," she said. I obeyed, my heart pounding. She studied me for a long moment, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. My too thin frame, my calloused hands, the fading bruise on my wrist from where I'd caught it in a door hinge last week. "What's your name?" she asked finally. I blinked. I'd been here 6 months, and she'd never asked. "Ilara, mistress." "Ilara," she repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "Tell me, Ilara, have you ever served in the king's private chambers?" "No, mistress, I don't have that clearance." "You do now." She stood, moving to a cabinet and extracting a folded uniform, the deep green of the king's personal staff, finer than anything I'd ever worn. "You're to report to his chambers immediately after breakfast. You'll be responsible for maintaining his quarters and attending to any needs he may have." The room tilted. I don't understand." "Why me?" Mistress Cora's expression hardened. "The king requested you specifically. It's not our place to question his choices, only to obey them. Do you understand?" I nodded numbly, taking the uniform with trembling hands. "Good. Don't make me regret vouching for you." She paused, then added more quietly, "And Ilara? Whatever you do, don't look him directly in the eyes. Men like him, They don't appreciate boldness from those beneath them. The king's chambers occupied the entire western tower, a space so vast and intimidating that I felt like an intruder the moment I crossed the threshold. Tall windows overlooked the northern forests, their glass so clean it seemed invisible, offering an unobstructed view of the wilderness that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The furniture was dark wood and leather, masculine and austere, with none of the ornate decorations that filled the rest of the castle. Everything here served a purpose. Nothing was merely for show. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, my new uniform stiff and unfamiliar against my skin. The sitting room, the study, with its massive desk covered in maps and correspondence. The bedchamber, dominated by a bed large enough to sleep four, its dark furs and linens perfectly arranged. He wasn't here. I'd been told he was attending morning council and wouldn't return until midday. Part of me was relieved. The other part, the reckless, curious part I'd tried so hard to suppress, felt oddly disappointed. I busied myself with the tasks Mistress Cora had outlined, changing the linens, dusting the bookshelves, stoking the fire in the hearth. The work was familiar, meditative, and for a while I lost myself in the rhythm of it. It was while I was on my knees, scrubbing at a stubborn stain on the stone floor near the hearth, that I heard the door open. I froze, my rag still pressed against the stone. Heavy footsteps crossed the room. I kept my head down, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain he could hear it. Mistress Cora's warning echoed in my mind. Don't look him directly in the eyes. Stand up. His voice was deeper than I'd expected, rough like gravel, with an edge of command that made obedience instinctive. I rose slowly, keeping my gaze fixed on the floor between us. Even without looking, I could feel the weight of his presence. The way he seemed to fill the entire room with an energy that made the air thick and hard to breathe. You're the new maid. It wasn't a question. Yes, Your Majesty. My voice came out steadier than I'd hoped. Silence stretched between us, heavy and expectant. I could feel him studying me, his gaze moving over my face, my hair, my trembling hands clasped in front of me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to remain still. Look at me. The command was soft, almost curious, but it sent a jolt of fear through my chest. I hesitated, remembering Mistress Cora's warning, but disobedience felt more dangerous than boldness. Slowly, I lifted my eyes. The impact of his gaze was physical. Those golden eyes, the same ones that had burned into me last night, locked onto mine with an intensity that stole my breath. Up close, he was even more imposing. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from stone, a mouth set in a hard line, but it was his eyes that held me captive. They weren't just looking at me, they were searching, as if trying to solve a puzzle I didn't know I posed. His expression shifted, confusion, recognition, something almost like pain. Then his hand moved, reaching toward me with a speed that made me flinch. But he didn't strike. Instead, his fingers brushed against my collar, pulling it aside to reveal the skin just above my collarbone. I gasped, stumbling backward, but his other hand caught my arm, holding me steady. Not roughly, almost gently. Be still, he murmured, his voice strangely hoarse. I obeyed, frozen in place as his fingers traced the edge of my birthmark. I'd had it my whole life, a crescent moon shape, pale against my already fair skin, nestled just above my heart. My mother had called it a blessing. My uncle had called it a blemish. I'd learned to forget it existed, but the way the Alpha King was looking at it now, with a mixture of awe and something close to devastation, made it feel like the most important thing in the world. How long have you had this? His voice was barely above a whisper. All my life, Your Majesty. His jaw clenched. His hand dropped away from my skin. But he didn't step back. We stood there, close enough that I could smell him, pine and smoke and something wild, something that made my wolf stir for the first time in months. She'd been silent since I'd arrived at the castle, beaten down by servitude and grief, but now she woke, pressing against my consciousness with a desperation that frightened me. Mate, she whispered. Mate, mate, mate. No. That was impossible. I was a servant, a nobody. The Alpha King's mate would be someone powerful, someone worthy of standing beside him. Not a broken girl sold to pay someone else's debts, but his wolf was calling to mine. I could feel it in the way the air between us hummed, in the way his breathing had gone shallow, in the way his hands trembled slightly before he forced them into fists at his sides. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rough. "Ilara, Your Majesty." "Ilara," he repeated, and the sound of my name in his mouth sent shivers down my spine. He stepped back abruptly, putting distance between us, and dragged a hand through his dark hair. "How did you come to be here?" I swallowed hard. My pack sold me, to settle a debt. His eyes flashed with anger so sudden and fierce that I took an involuntary step backward, but it wasn't directed at me. "Which pack?" "Silverbrook, Your Majesty, in the Eastern Territories. And your family?" "Dead. My parents died 3 years ago. My uncle took over as Alpha and..." I trailed off. The rest of the story didn't matter. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he turned away, moving to the window and staring out at the forest beyond. I watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the window frame as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Minutes passed. I didn't know if I should leave or stay, so I remained frozen in place, my mind racing. Finally, he spoke without turning around. "You'll continue your duties here, but you're not to leave these chambers without my permission. You're not to speak to anyone about what just happened. And if anyone asks, you're simply my personal maid. Nothing more. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good. You're dismissed." I fled. The next 3 days passed in a haze of confusion and carefully controlled panic. I performed my duties in the king's chambers, which he'd taken to calling simply Cade when we were alone, though I couldn't bring myself to use his given name. With meticulous care, always aware of his presence even when he wasn't in the room, he watched me. Constantly. Those golden eyes tracked my movements as I worked, studied my face when I thought I wasn't looking, followed the line of my throat when I swallowed nervously. But he never touched me again, never came close. It was as if that first moment had frightened him as much as it had frightened me. The other servants noticed my new position, of course. Margot's jealousy manifested in pointed comments and accidental collisions in the corridors. The younger maids watched me with a mixture of envy and pity, whispering behind their hands whenever I passed. But it was the beta, Cade's second in command, a man named Ronan with steel-gray hair and shrewd eyes, who finally cornered me. I was carrying fresh linens through the upper corridor when he appeared, blocking my path with his considerable bulk. "The king's new pet," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You've caused quite a stir." I kept my eyes down. "I'm just a maid, sir. Just a maid," he repeated, amusement coloring his tone. "And yet the king requested you specifically. Keeps you isolated in his chambers. Forbids you from speaking to others." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Tell me, girl. What are you really? I don't know what you mean. Don't play stupid. I've served Cade for 15 years. I know when something's different, and you..." He studied me with those sharp eyes. "You're different. I can smell it on you, on him. That restlessness, that tension." My hands tightened on the linens. I should go. The king is in council and will be for hours. Ronan's expression softened slightly. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever's happening between you two, it's dangerous for both of you. There are people in this court who would use any weakness against him, and you, little maid, are a very visible weakness. I'm not... You are." His voice was firm but not unkind. "And if you care about him at all, you'll be careful. Very careful." He stepped aside, letting me pass. But his words followed me back to the king's chambers, settling in my chest like stones. That night, Cade returned late, smelling of whiskey and frustration. I was still awake, mending one of his shirts by the fire in the sitting room. I'd taken to staying late, unable to return to the servants' quarters where questions and gossip waited. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me, his broad frame silhouetted by the dim light from the corridor. "You're still here. I was just finishing, Your Majesty. I'll leave. No? The word was sharp, almost desperate. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and dropped into the chair across from me, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. Stay. I set down my mending, unsure what to do. This wasn't the commanding Alpha King. This was a man who looked lost. Are you all right? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He laughed, a bitter sound. No, I'm not all right. I haven't been all right since the moment I saw you. My breath caught. Your Majesty? He lifted his head, those golden eyes finding mine across the flickering firelight. When we're alone, call me Cade. I can't. It's not proper. No, none of this is proper. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Do you know what you are to me, Alara? I shook my head, even though my wolf was screaming the answer. You're my mate. The words hung in the air like a confession. That birthmark, it's the sign. My family has carried the legend for generations. A crescent moon above the heart, the mark of the one destined to stand beside the Alpha King. He turned to face me, anguish written across his features. And you're a servant, sold like property, broken by people who should have protected you. Tears burned behind my eyes. I didn't ask for this. Neither did I. His voice cracked. But here we are. And I don't know what to do. If I claim you publicly, you become a target. Every enemy I have will see you as a way to hurt me. If I don't... He trailed off, his hands clenching into fists. If I don't, I'm condemning us both to a half-life. You, invisible and dismissed. Me, slowly going mad from having my mate so close but untouchable. I stood on shaking legs. Then what do we do? He crossed the distance between us, stopping just close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. We survive, he said quietly. We're patient. We're careful. And when the time is right, when you're ready, we change everything. His hand lifted, hovering near my cheek but not quite touching. Can you do that? Can you be patient with me? I thought of my mother's words. Sometimes the ones who survive are the ones who know when to bend. I'd bent for so long. Maybe it was time to learn how to stand. Yes, I whispered. I can be patient. His eyes closed, relief washing over his face. And when they opened again, there was something new there, something that looked almost like hope. 3 weeks passed like a strange dream. I fell into a rhythm within Cade's chambers. Days spent maintaining his private world. Evenings when he would return, and we would exist in this careful dance of proximity and restraint. We talked, cautiously at first, then with growing ease. He told me about the weight of leadership, the constant political maneuvering, the loneliness of a throne that demanded everything and offered nothing. I told him about my childhood, my parents' love, the way music used to fill our small house before everything shattered. We didn't touch. Not once since that first day. But the distance between us felt more intimate than any embrace. It was during the 4th week that everything began to unravel. I was in the castle gardens, a rare privilege Cade had granted, after I'd mentioned missing the feel of soil under my fingers and the scent of growing things. The head gardener, an elderly man named Thomas with kind eyes and gnarled hands, had welcomed my help without question. He didn't care about politics or hierarchies, only whether you respected the plants and worked honestly. I was kneeling beside a bed of late-season roses, carefully pruning dead blooms when I heard voices approaching. Female voices, sharp with barely concealed venom. I'm telling you, something's wrong with him, one said. I recognized the speaker, Lady Vivian, a visiting dignitary from the Southern Territories, beautiful and ambitious in equal measure. She'd been at court for 2 weeks, making no secret of her interest in Cade. He barely acknowledges me, won't accept any invitations. It's as if he's distracted by something, or someone. Another voice added slyly, I heard he's taken a new maid, keeps her isolated in his chambers. Very unusual behavior for our stoic king. My hand stilled on the pruning shears. A maid? Vivian's laugh was cruel. Please. Cade would never lower himself to, I'm just saying what I've heard. Pale hair, Quiet, timid as a mouse. The other servants say he watches her constantly. Then perhaps someone should investigate this little mouse. For the king's own protection, of course. Vivienne's voice dripped with false concern. After all, who knows what intentions a servant girl might have? She could be a spy, a threat, or simply someone taking advantage of our king's generous nature. They moved on, their laughter fading into the afternoon air. But their words remained, coiling around my chest like thorns. I finished my work mechanically, my mind racing. Thomas noticed my distraction but said nothing, only squeezed my shoulder gently as I left. His weathered face creased with worry. When I returned to Cade's chambers, he was already there, standing at his desk with Ronan. Maps covered the surface, marked with what looked like territory boundaries. Both men looked up as I entered, and I saw Ronan's eyes narrow slightly. "Ilara," Cade said, and just hearing my name in his voice sent warmth through my chest. "Come here." I approached hesitantly, aware of Ronan's scrutiny. Cade gestured to the maps. "I want you to see this, to understand what's happening." He pointed to the Eastern Territories, my former homeland. "There's been increased aggression from Silverbrook. Your uncle is making moves against smaller packs, consolidating power. It's going to force my hand soon." My stomach twisted. "What will you do?" "What I must." His jaw tightened. "But I wanted you to know. If I move against Silverbrook, it might seem like I'm doing it for personal reasons. The council will question my judgment." "He means they'll say he's doing it for you," Ronan interjected bluntly, "that he's letting his emotions compromise his duty." I looked between them, understanding dawning like cold water. "You can't act against him because of me, because it would expose that you matter to me." Cade finished quietly. "Yes." "Then don't." The words came out firm, stronger than I felt. "Let him do what he wants. My connection to that pack died with my parents. Don't compromise yourself for my mate?" Cade's voice was soft, but edged with frustration. "Don't ask me to ignore threats to the territories I'm sworn to protect just because acting would reveal what you are to me." "What she is to you is a liability," Ronan said, not unkindly. "I'm not blind, Cade. I know what she is. That mark. The way you both move around each other like magnets fighting their own pull. I've seen enough matings to recognize one." He turned to me, his expression serious. "And I'm not the only one who's noticed. Lady Vivienne has been asking questions. So has Councilman Thorne. The longer you hide this, the more dangerous it becomes. What would you have me do?" Cade's voice was tight, with barely controlled emotion. "Announce her as my mate before she's ready? Before I can guarantee her safety? They would tear her apart, Ronan. You know they would. I know they might tear you both apart anyway if you keep pretending there's nothing between you." Ronan's voice softened. "I'm not your enemy, Cade. I'm trying to help you see clearly." "This situation can't continue indefinitely." The room fell silent, heavy with unspoken truths. I could feel Cade's frustration radiating from him in waves, see the tension in every line of his body. He was trapped between duty and desire, between protecting me and protecting his throne. I thought about my mother's words again, about bending, about surviving. But maybe surviving wasn't enough anymore. What if I was ready? The words came out quietly, but they seemed to echo in the stillness. Both men turned to look at me. "What if I stopped hiding?" I continued, my voice growing stronger even as my hands trembled. "You said when the time was right, when I was ready, we would change everything. Maybe the time has to be right because we make it right." Cade crossed to me in 2 strides, his hands hovering near my face but still not touching. "Ilara, you don't understand what you're offering, the scrutiny, the judgment, the danger. I understand that hiding hasn't made us safer. I understand that your enemies are already circling. I understand that I'm tired of being invisible." I met his golden eyes, letting him see the truth in mine. "I've been bent for so long I forgot what it felt like to stand. But you make me want to stand. Even if it's terrifying." Something shifted in his expression. Awe mixed with fierce pride. "You're sure?" "No," I admitted honestly. "But I'm brave enough to try. Ronan cleared his throat. If you're going to do this, do it strategically. The Autumn Council meets in 3 days. Representatives from all territories will be present. It's formal, public, and provides protection through witnesses. He looked at me seriously. But once it's done, there's no going back. You'll be thrust into a world you're not prepared for. You'll have enemies you've never met. Are you truly ready for that? I thought about the last 6 months. The humiliation. The invisibility. The way I'd learned to make myself small and silent. Then I thought about the last few weeks with Cade. The way he looked at me as if I was something precious. The way my wolf sang when he was near. The way I'd started to remember who I'd been before grief and servitude had stripped me down. I won't say I'm not frightened, I said carefully, but I'm more frightened of living half a life. Of watching him carry this burden alone when I could stand beside him. Cade's hands finally made contact, cupping my face with a gentleness that made my breath catch. Then we stand together, he murmured. In 3 days, I announce you as my mate before the Autumn Council. Whatever comes after, we face it as one. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and the simple touch sent electricity racing through my veins. My wolf surged forward, desperate for more, but I held her back. This moment was too important to rush. Together, I whispered. Ronan nodded approvingly. I'll begin preparations. We'll need to move her to more appropriate quarters, update her wardrobe, begin basic training in court etiquette. She stays here, Cade interrupted firmly. Until the announcement, nothing changes. I won't risk her being more vulnerable than she already is. Cade. That's an order, Ronan. The beta sighed but nodded. As you wish. But at least let me assign additional security to this wing. Quietly. I don't trust Vivian's sudden interest. As Ronan left to make arrangements, Cade and I stood together in the dimming light, his hand still cradling my face. The weight of what we'd decided hung between us, exciting and terrifying in equal measure. There's something I need to tell you, he said quietly, about why I've never claimed a mate before, why I've been alone all these years. I waited, sensing this was important. My father found his mate when he was young. My mother. She was beautiful, kind, everything a queen should be. His voice roughened. She was also human, weak, by wolf standards. When enemies attacked, she couldn't defend herself. They used her to hurt him, and eventually, she didn't survive. He was never the same after. He became harsh, distant. He taught me that love was a weapon enemies could use against you. Understanding flooded through me. You think I'm weak? No. His response was immediate and fierce. I think you're brave and resilient and stronger than you know, but I also know that others will see you as I once saw weakness, as a vulnerability to exploit, and I'm terrified of failing you the way my father failed my mother. I reached up, covering his hands with my own. Then don't fail me. Teach me. Prepare me. Let me become strong enough to stand beside you. Not just as your mate, but as your equal. His eyes searched mine, and I saw the moment he truly believed me. The moment he decided to take the leap with me. 3 days, he said, his voice rough with emotion. 3 days, and everything changes. 3 days, I agreed. He pulled me into his arms then, finally, properly, and the feel of his solid warmth against me was like coming home. My wolf settled, content for the first time in years. His face buried in my hair, breathing me in, and I felt his whole body relax, as if some fundamental tension had finally released. We stood like that until the sun set completely, wrapped in each other and the promise of a future we would fight for together. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Ronan proved invaluable, drilling me on court protocol in the early mornings while Cade attended to his duties. I learned which nobles held power, which were allies, which were threats. I learned how to move, how to speak, how to hold myself with the dignity expected of an Alpha King's mate. But more than that, I learned about Cade, about the boy who'd grown up in his father's cold shadow, about the young Alpha who'd had to fight his own counsel for respect, about the man who carried the weight of thousands of lives on his shoulders and never complained about the burden. He opened up in ways I sensed he never had before, sharing fears and hopes and dreams he'd kept locked away, and I shared my own, my memories of my parents, my grief, my shame at how easily I'd let myself be broken. "You weren't broken," he told me one evening as we sat by the fire in his chambers. "You were surviving. There's no shame in that. I let them make me invisible. And now you're choosing to be seen. That takes more courage than you know." On the morning of the autumn council, I woke before dawn, my stomach a knot of nerves. Cade was already awake, standing at the window and watching the sunrise paint the forest in shades of gold and crimson. "Having second thoughts?" he asked without turning. "Constantly." I joined him at the window, and he pulled me against his side, his arm around my waist. "But I'm not backing down." "Good." He pressed a kiss to my temple, a gesture that had become familiar over the past days. "Because I'm not letting you go." Ronan arrived with a dress, deep emerald green, elegant, but not ostentatious. The color of Cade's royal house. I changed in the bedchamber while they waited, my hands shaking as I fastened the buttons. When I emerged, Cade's eyes darkened with appreciation and something fiercer. "You look like a queen," he said quietly. I looked terrified. "You look perfect." He offered his arm. "Ready?" I took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the formal jacket. As I'll ever be. The council chamber was enormous, with vaulted ceilings and long tables arranged in a rectangle. Representatives from every territory sat in their designated places, their conversations creating a low rumble that fell silent as we entered. Every eye turned to us, to him, the powerful Alpha King in his ceremonial robes. To me, the unknown woman on his arm. I felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical thing, saw Lady Vivian's eyes narrow with malice, saw Councilman Thorne lean forward with undisguised curiosity. Saw 100 other faces, some curious, some suspicious, some openly hostile. My step faltered. Cade's hand covered mine on his arm, steadying me. "Breathe," he murmured. "I'm right here." We walked to the head of the room, where 2 chairs waited on a raised platform. One large and ornate, one smaller, but equally grand. The second chair had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, until now. Cade didn't sit immediately. Instead, he turned to face the assembly, his presence commanding instant attention. I stood beside him, trying to channel every lesson Ronan had taught me about posture and confidence. "Members of the council," Cade's voice rang clear and authoritative. "I've called this session because I have an announcement that affects not just this court, but all the territories under my protection." Silence. Absolute and expectant. His hand found mine, our fingers interlacing. "I have found my mate." The room erupted. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming. Voices rose in a cacophony of shock, outrage, and disbelief. Councilman Thorne was on his feet, his face red with anger. Lady Vivian's expression had gone from malicious satisfaction to genuine fury. Others simply stared, mouths agape, trying to process what they'd just heard. Cade raised his hand, and the authority in that single gesture was enough to quiet the room to a tense simmer. "Her name is Alara," he continued, his voice steady and unyielding. "She bears the mark of the crescent moon, the sign my family has carried in legend for generations. She is my destined mate, and I claim her before this council and before the moon herself." Thorne found his voice first. "This is preposterous. We know nothing about this girl. Where did she come from? What pack? What lineage?" "She is from Silverbrook," Cade replied evenly. "Daughter of Marcus and Helena, who served that pack with honor before they fell in the border conflicts 3 years ago." I felt my throat tighten at hearing my parents' names spoken aloud in this grand chamber, given the respect they'd been denied in death. "Silverbrook?" Another councilman stood, his expression calculating. "The pack that's been causing problems in the Eastern Territories? How convenient that the king's supposed mate appears just as tensions with that region escalate. Are you suggesting she's a plant?" Ronan's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and dangerous. He'd positioned himself near the platform, his stance protective. "Choose your next words carefully, Councilman Drake." "I'm suggesting," Drake said, clearly choosing to be bold despite the warning, "that this is highly suspicious timing." A nobody servant girl suddenly revealed as the king's mate? It sounds like either a political manipulation or, forgive me, Your Majesty, A lapse in judgment brought on by baser instincts. The insult hung in the air like poison. I felt Cade's rage building, felt his wolf rising to the surface, his hand tightening painfully around mine. But before he could respond, I stepped forward. "You're right to be suspicious." My voice was quieter than Cade's, but in the shocked silence that followed my interruption, it carried clearly. I was a servant. I was sold by my uncle to pay his debts. I've scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots and been invisible for months. I have no political training, no diplomatic experience, no powerful family to back my claim. I could feel Cade's tension beside me, sense his desire to protect me, but I pressed on. "But I do have this." I pulled aside the high collar of my dress, revealing the crescent moon birthmark above my heart. "And I have something else. I have survived grief and loss and humiliation. I have learned what it means to be powerless, and I have chosen to stand anyway. Not because I seek power or influence, but because I am tired of being invisible, tired of letting fear make my choices for me." I met Drake's eyes directly. "You can question my qualifications. You can doubt my worthiness. But you cannot doubt that I am here by the moon's design, not by political scheming. The mark doesn't lie, and neither does he." I gestured to Cade, my hand steady despite the trembling in my knees. Lady Vivienne rose, her beauty twisted by spite. "Pretty words from a serving girl playing dress-up. Tell me, dear, do you even know how to read? How to manage a household? How to navigate the complexities of international pack politics?" She looked around the room, playing to her audience. "The Alpha King needs a partner who can stand beside him in strength, not a charity case who will be a liability the moment real danger appears. You speak of strength as if it's only measured in power and position," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "But I've seen a different kind of strength. The strength to keep going when everything's been taken from you. The strength to choose compassion when the world has shown you only cruelty. The strength to hope when hope seems foolish." I paused, letting my words settle. "If that makes me weak in your eyes, Lady Vivienne, then perhaps we have different definitions of the word." A few murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. Not many, but enough to show that not everyone was against me. Thorn wasn't finished. "Even if we accept that the mark is genuine, and I'm not conceding that point, there's still the matter of proper protocol. A mating this significant should involve ceremonies, negotiations between packs, formal presentations. Not this ambush. There is no pack to negotiate with," Cade said, his voice hard. "Alara's family is dead. Her former alpha sold her like property. The only pack she answers to now is mine." "Then she has no standing," Thorn argued. "No family to vouch for her character, no allies to support her claim. For all we know, she could be anyone, wearing any mark, telling any story." "Enough." Cade's voice cracked like a whip, and the room fell into immediate silence. "I am your Alpha King. I have led these territories through war and peace, through prosperity and hardship. I have earned your respect and your trust. And now I am telling you that this woman is my mate. The Council's role is to acknowledge this truth, not to approve or deny it. Your opinions on the matter are noted, but ultimately irrelevant." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. This was the Alpha King in his full authority, and the reminder of his power was impossible to ignore. But Thorn was either brave or foolish enough to push further. "And when your enemies use her against you? When they realize that the mighty Alpha King has a weak point that can be exploited? What then?" "Then they will learn," Cade said softly, dangerously, "that she is not as weak as they assume, and that anyone who threatens her will answer to me." "Bold words," Drake interjected. "But words don't stop assassins or poisoned blades. Words don't prevent kidnapping or—" "Neither does hiding." I cut him off again, earning a sharp look. "You talk about danger as if it's something I don't understand, but I've lived with danger. I've survived loss. I've endured cruelty from people who should have protected me. And yes, being the Alpha King's mate makes me a target. But being invisible and powerless didn't keep me safe either. It just made my suffering private instead of public." I turned to address the whole room. drawing on every ounce of courage I possessed. I know I'm not what you expected. I know I'm not what you would have chosen, but the moon doesn't consult our preferences. She places people in our paths for reasons we don't always understand immediately. Maybe I'm here to remind this court that strength comes in many forms. Maybe I'm here to show that worth isn't determined by birth or power. Or maybe I'm just here to stand beside the man fate chose for me and try my best not to fail him, or you. The silence that followed was different. Thoughtful. Some faces had softened, others remained hostile, but the absolute rejection I'd feared wasn't materializing. Ronan stepped forward. The mark is genuine. I've verified it myself. The signs are unmistakable to anyone who knows the old legends. And as someone who has served King Cade for 15 years, I can tell you that I've never seen him more centered, more focused, than he has been these past weeks. She doesn't weaken him. She grounds him. The beta vouches for her, someone murmured. That's not insignificant. An older woman near the back stood, Lady Meredith, if I remembered correctly, one of the few female territorial leaders. I have a question for the girl. I nodded, inviting her to speak. You say you understand danger and loss, but do you understand duty? Do you comprehend what it means to put the needs of thousands before your own comfort? To make decisions that will hurt people you care about because they serve the greater good? Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Love is easy, child. Leadership is not. Are you prepared for that reality? The question struck deeper than any accusation, because she was right. I didn't fully understand what I was stepping into. I'd focused so much on surviving, on being brave enough to stand, that I hadn't fully contemplated the weight of the crown I'd be sharing. No, I admitted honestly. I'm not prepared. Not fully. I've spent 6 months learning how to scrub floors, not how to lead nations. But I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to work harder than anyone in this room thinks I'm capable of. I'm willing to fail and get back up and try again, because that's what you do when something matters. And this, standing beside Cade, serving these territories the way my parents served theirs, this matters to me. Lady Meredith studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. At least she's honest. She looked at Cade. I'll support the mating, Your Majesty, but I expect her to prove herself. If she fails to rise to the challenge, that failure reflects on you as well. Understood, Cade replied, and noted. One by one, other council members began to voice their positions. Some supportive, many neutral, a few still openly opposed. But the tide had turned from outright rejection to grudging acceptance. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. When the session finally ended hours later, I felt wrung out and exhausted. Cade led me from the chamber, his arm around my waist, protective and possessive. Ronan followed at a distance, screening off anyone who might have tried to approach. We didn't return to Cade's chambers. Instead, he took me to a different part of the castle, a tower I'd never entered before. We climbed the winding stairs in silence until we emerged onto an open platform that overlooked the entire valley. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. The forest stretched endlessly below us, wild and beautiful and free. This is where I come when the walls close in, Cade said quietly. When I need to remember why I fight so hard to protect all of this. I leaned against the stone parapet, letting the wind cool my flushed face. Did I embarrass you? Speaking out like that? Embarrass me? He turned me to face him, his hands on my shoulders. You were magnificent, brave and honest and stronger than half the warriors in that room. His expression softened. I'm proud of you, Alara. I know today was terrifying, and you faced it with more grace than I had any right to expect. Tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. I was so scared. I'm still scared. What if Lady Meredith is right? What if I'm not strong enough for this? Then you'll learn, you'll grow, and I'll be beside you every step. He wiped my tears gently. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to try. And you've already proven that you are. I leaned into him, letting his solid presence anchor me. What happens now? Now we face the consequences. Some of the council will try to undermine you. Vivian will likely cause problems. Thorn will look for any excuse to question my judgment. He pressed a kiss to my forehead, but we anticipated that. We prepared for it. And we'll handle it together. Together, I echoed, the word becoming a promise. We stood there as the sun disappeared completely, and stars began to emerge. The castle below us glowed with lamplight, and I could hear distant sounds of evening activity. Servants preparing dinner, guards changing shifts, the normal rhythms of life continuing despite the upheaval of the day. "There's something I want to give you," Cade said eventually, pulling back slightly. He reached into his jacket and extracted a small box. Inside was a ring, elegant in its simplicity, a band of white gold set with a moonstone that seemed to glow with inner light. "It belonged to my grandmother," he explained. "She was human, like my mother, but she was fierce and clever and absolutely fearless. My grandfather said she was the strongest person he ever knew, regardless of her lack of wolf blood." He took the ring from the box and held it up to catch the starlight. "She taught me that strength isn't about power or dominance. It's about choosing to stand when everything in you wants to run, about finding courage in the moments that terrify you most." He took my left hand, his touch gentle. "You remind me of her, Alara, that quiet strength, that refusal to break even when the world tries its hardest to shatter you." He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. "I wanted you to have this, not as a symbol of ownership or claim, but as a reminder. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and you belong here, beside me. Not because fate decreed it, but because you chose it." I stared at the ring, this tangible proof that I was no longer invisible, no longer nothing. The moonstone caught the starlight and threw it back in prisms of pale blue and silver. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing me, for choosing me back." He pulled me close again, and we stood wrapped in each other, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of lessons and adjustments. Lady Meredith took me under her wing, teaching me about territorial politics and resource management with a stern but patient demeanor. Ronan drilled me in strategy and basic defense. Even some of the council members who'd been skeptical warmed slightly as they saw my genuine effort to learn and contribute. But there were darker moments, too. Vivian spread rumors about my past, twisted versions of truth designed to make me look calculating or desperate. Thorn continued to question Cade's decisions in ways that subtly implied I was influencing him negatively. And there were threats, anonymous notes, suspicious accidents, moments when I felt eyes watching from shadows. Cade never left me unprotected. Guards were assigned, routes were changed, food was tasted before I ate. It was suffocating and necessary in equal measure. 2 months after the announcement, Cade had to travel to the Eastern Territories to finally address my uncle's aggression. He didn't want to leave me, but duty demanded it. "I'll be fine," I assured him the night before his departure, though neither of us fully believed it. "Ronan will be here. Lady Meredith. I'll be safe." "Safe isn't the same as okay." He cupped my face, his eyes troubled. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks." "I promise." I covered his hands with mine. "And you promise me the same. Come back to me." "Always," he said fiercely, before kissing me with an intensity that left us both breathless. He left at dawn, taking half the castle guard with him. I watched from our tower until the column disappeared into the forest, then turned to face the challenges of managing in his absence. The first few days passed quietly. I attended council meetings, studied reports, continued my lessons, but on the 4th day, everything changed. I was in the library, reviewing trade agreements with Lady Meredith, when Ronan burst in, his face pale. "There's been an incident at the eastern border," he said without preamble. "Cade's party was ambushed. We don't have full details yet, but there are casualties." My heart stopped. "Is he?" "We don't know. Communications are disrupted, but Lady Vivian is calling an emergency council session. She's claiming that with the king possibly compromised, leadership decisions need to be made immediately." His expression was grim. "She's making a play for temporary authority. And she's arguing that you, as an unproven mate with no formal standing, should be excluded from the proceedings." Lady Meredith stood abruptly. "That viper. She's been waiting for exactly this opportunity." She looked at me seriously. How you handle the next few hours will determine whether this court sees you as a leader or as a decoration. Are you ready? Was I ready? No, I was terrified. Cade might be hurt or worse. Enemies were circling. Everything we'd built could crumble in moments. But I thought about my mother's voice, about Cade's grandmother's ring on my finger, about the girl who'd scrubbed floors and learned to survive, about the woman who'd chosen to stand even when every instinct screamed to hide. I'm ready, I said, and meant it. The council chamber was already full when we arrived. Vivian stood at the head table, having claimed the central position with audacious confidence. When she saw me enter, her smile was pure poison. How kind of you to join us, she said with false sweetness, though I'm not sure your presence is necessary for military discussions. I am the Alpha King's mate, I replied calmly, walking to the platform and taking my seat, not Cade's throne, but my own chair beside it, which means I represent his interests in his absence. I belong here. A mate who's been officially recognized for barely 2 months, Thorne interjected. Hardly qualified to make strategic decisions. Then it's fortunate I'm not making them alone. I looked around the room, meeting eyes steadily. This council exists precisely for moments like this, to provide guidance and collaborative leadership when the king cannot be present. I'm not trying to command you. I'm asking you to do the job you were appointed to do. Vivian's expression soured. Pretty words. But the reality is that we face potential invasion from the east, disrupted supply lines from the ambush, and no clear information about the king's status. We need decisive action, not diplomatic platitudes. Then let's be decisive, I agreed. What are our immediate priorities? The next hours were intense. I listened more than I spoke, asked questions when I didn't understand, and deferred to more experienced voices on military matters. But when Vivian tried to suggest recalling troops from the southern border, a move that would leave us vulnerable to attacks from her own territory, I spoke up. That seems strategically unwise, I said carefully, given that we don't actually know the full scope of the eastern situation yet. Wouldn't it be premature to weaken other defenses based on incomplete information? Are you questioning my assessment? Vivian's voice was sharp. I'm questioning whether any of us have enough information to make that assessment, I replied, and suggesting we wait for fuller intelligence before making moves that could create additional vulnerabilities. Lady Meredith nodded approvingly. The girl has a point. We're reacting in fear rather than responding strategically. The debate continued, but the tide had shifted. I wasn't trying to dominate or control. I was simply refusing to be dismissed. And slowly I could see some council members beginning to view me differently, not as a serving girl playing dress-up, but as someone genuinely trying to serve the territories. It was near midnight when the messenger finally arrived, mud-splattered and exhausted. The room fell silent as he delivered his report. "The king lives," he gasped out, and my knees nearly buckled with relief. "He's injured but stable. The ambush was repelled, but he requests that the Luna—" He looked at me directly. "Be informed that he'll return within 3 days, and that she should trust her own judgment until then." The Luna. He'd called me the Luna. His message was clear. He trusted me to lead in his absence. I stood, drawing on every lesson I'd learned. Then we continue as we are. We maintain defensive positions, we gather intelligence, and we prepare for the king's return. I looked at Vivian directly. Unless there are objections? She glared but said nothing. She'd been outmaneuvered, and we both knew it. When Cade finally returned, wounded but alive, I met him in the courtyard. He was barely off his horse before I was in his arms, checking him for injuries even as he checked me for the same. "You led them," he said softly, wonder in his voice. Ronan sent word. "You stood before the council and held them together." "I didn't have a choice," I replied. "You weren't here, and they needed someone to remind them not to panic. You always have a choice." He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my lips. "And you chose to be exactly what I knew you could be. Strong, wise, a true Luna." Over the following months, I continued to grow into my role. I never became the warrior some wanted me to be. But I became something else, a mediator, a voice of reason, someone who could see past political maneuvering to genuine needs. I established programs for servants and lower-ranked pack members, giving voice to people who'd been invisible as I once was. I worked with Lady Meredith to improve resource distribution. I learned to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics without losing my essential self. Vivian eventually left court, her ambitions thwarted. Thorne grudgingly admitted I'd earned my place. And slowly, the territories began to see me not as Cade's weakness, but as his balance, the compassion to his strength, the diplomacy to his authority. 1 year after the Autumn Council announcement, Cade took me back to our tower at sunset. The valley below was lush with summer growth, peaceful and prosperous. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small scroll tied with ribbon. "From your former pack, from the people who knew your parents." I unrolled it with trembling hands. Inside were signatures, dozens of them, from pack members who remembered Marcus and Helena, who wanted me to know that my parents had been respected, loved, mourned, that their legacy lived on not just in me, but in the memories of people who'd refused to let them be forgotten. "They're proud of you," Cade said softly. "Your uncle is no longer Alpha. The Pack Council removed him for his crimes. They wanted you to know that you've honored your family's name." I pressed the scroll to my chest, tears streaming freely. "I wish they could see this, see what I've become. They can." He turned me to face the sunset, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Wherever they are, they see you. Standing tall, leading with compassion, choosing courage over fear. They see their daughter, who took everything they taught her about survival and strength and love, and built something extraordinary." I leaned back against him, feeling the solid reality of his presence. The weight of the ring on my finger, the certainty of belonging that had replaced the invisibility I'd worn for so long. Below us, the castle was coming alive with evening lanterns. Our people, because they were mine too now, not just Cade's, moving through their lives in the safety we'd built together. Children playing in the courtyards, couples walking hand in hand, elderly pack members sitting on benches and sharing stories. This was what I'd fought for. Not power or prestige, but the chance to matter. To stand beside someone who saw me truly and chose me anyway. To build something worth protecting. "What are you thinking?" Cade asked, his lips against my hair. "That I'm glad I was brave enough to stand," I said honestly, even when it terrified me. Especially then. "I'm glad too." He turned me in his arms, those golden eyes bright with love and pride. "My Luna, my mate, my Alara." He kissed me as the sun disappeared and the first stars emerged, and I kissed him back with the certainty that I was finally, truly home. The girl who'd scrubbed floors was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that strength came in many forms, that sometimes the greatest courage was simply choosing to be seen, that love wasn't a weakness to be exploited, but a power that could transform everything it touched. I'd been invisible once, but now I was a beacon, and I would spend the rest of my life making sure that others who felt lost and forgotten knew they, too, could choose to stand. Together, Cade and I turned toward the castle, toward our life, toward the future we would build one brave choice at a time. And as we walked, I knew with absolute certainty I was exactly where I was meant to be,